This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, I'm Maureen Bogey.
And I'm Dylan Hackworth.
And you are listening to the Creep Street Podcast. Wow, we are so happy to have you here with us today. We are in for quite a cuckoo crazy ride. If you want to keep up with us and know what we are up to, what we are thinking about, what's on our frickin' brains,
oh yeah,
feel free to follow us on Instagram at Creep Street Podcast. We're on Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We're also on Facebook, and on Facebook we have a smaller group called Citizens of the Milky Way. And if you are a fan of the podcast, we just graciously ask you to like, rate, subscribe, tell friends about it.
Oh yeah,
just spread the good word of this Creep Street nation. You know what I'm talking about. We also have a Patreon page if you were looking for some of that extra bonus content. You know what I'm talking about? We have 3 separate tiers full of amazing bonus goodies. Well, no matter what tier you might want to give to, you will always get at least one audio bonus from the two of us.
That's right.
Dylan and Mo every single month. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check out patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast.
And of course, we will be reading the names of our top tier Patreon subscribers at the end of the show.
Of course, of course.
I like to save the best for last, of course.
Now, Dylan, we have been doing some damn ass crazy spookiness lately.
Oh yeah, Grinning Man really got to people.
It really did, and it got to me. I've been having weird dreams lately.
Yeah.
Like, it just is so chilling. I think why it strikes a chord with so many people is because it really just alters your whole perception of reality.
Right.
You know?
I think at first the Grinning Man just seems like this peripheral thing in paranormal lore, but you find out he's kind of like a cornerstone to many things that are a part of this world.
And also, like, so important to the theory or the idea that, you know, we have talked about before on the podcast that, like, all of this stuff, paranormal activity, ghosts, UFOs, you know, fill in the blank, they could all kind of be connected in some way. They're all they're all within the same realm or follow similar rules or something. It's just like, damn, it's weird. It's so outside of how we live, you know?
Today we're going to be talking about something that does not play by anybody's rules.
So there we go.
This is one of the creepiest stories. This is going to mess you up.
This is a rule-breaking summer we're having. I'm loving it.
I mean, this is really creepy stuff.
No, this is weird. This is kind of got that, like, you'll see. It makes me uncomfortable. It's weird. It's unsettling.
Today's episode is The Shapeless Terror of Berkeley Square. Okay, and real quick, let me give you my sources.
I would just fucking love that shit.
First, I read a book called Haunted London by Peter Underwood.
Oh.
And then 2 articles from Mysterious Universe are The Bizarre Nameless Thing of Berkeley Square and also Truly Bizarre Encounters with Outlandish Tentacled Entities, both by Brent Swanser.
Oh my god, tentacle entities?
This is gonna go to some creepy places.
You guys, the sea is just, we're not meant to be in contact with this shit. It's weird. It's scary. I can't.
This thing might not be from the ocean.
Oh, it's worse.
And finally, 50 Berkeley Square by Richard Jones at hauntedlondon.com. Well, as the sources probably told you, this story takes place in London.
I guess so. Oh my gosh. I'm very excited.
It's at its core, this story is a haunted house story, but like I said, it's so much more. This is very Lovecraftian. It gets almost to like
yes.
cosmic horror. So the location of our tale is right in the heart of London, England, specifically London's West End.
Oh, okay, theater alert.
In a ritzy part of town called Mayfair, and within Mayfair, you will find a public garden square.
It sounds great.
Berkeley Square. Now, Berkeley Square dates back to the mid-1700s when the plans were laid out by an architect named William Kent. But there's one building in Berkeley Square in particular that's the focus of today's story. 50 Berkeley Square is a single 4-story brick townhouse that sits in the middle of the square, and surrounding it is a spiked metal railing.
This is giving me a little bit of a Penny Dreadful moment. Yeah. When did this happen?
From about 1840 to the turn of the century.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, yes, it is very much kind of Victorian dreadful zone. Yes, it really is reminding me of that.
In fact, many of the sources even said during Victorian London, this Berkeley Square was at the height of its fame for being a haunted place.
So cool. Because, this is when, like, interest in the paranormal world was just, like, blowing up. Kind of for the first, not that, I mean, people have always been interested in these things, obviously, but this was, I think, probably the first time it was such a worldwide phenomenon.
Right. It almost became a pastime in a way, in a weird way. Very interesting stuff. And apparently from the very beginning, since it was built, there's been stories of strange things going on at 50 Berkeley Square. And it's believed that several ghosts haunt this place. Yet, if you were to stay a night in 50 Berkeley Square, these ghosts might be the least of your worries.
Yeah, okay.
The first incident that really made a splash at 50 Berkeley Square happened in 1840. A group of young men were out having a drink at a local pub not far away from Berkeley Square. Now, as I said before, there had always been these strange tales, some more likely to have happened than others. There were stories that one could see the ghost of a child haunting Berkeley Square, and the legend was this child was in the nursery when something scared it to death in the middle of the night.
Oh, God.
And there was also claims that the place was haunted by the ghost of a young woman who she lived with her uncle who was abusive, sexually abusive as well. And the legend was she had tried to climb out the window to escape him and accidentally fell.
Oh,
now,
fuck.
These are stories we don't know if they're true, but they were kind of picked up by reputation of this place. So these young men at the pub, one of them was a 20-year-old man by the name of Sir Robert Warboys. Now, he's hearing all these stories about Berkeley Square, and he's not buying it.
No, he's like, I've got a mustache. I know better.
Sir Robert's hearing all this talk, and he's like, bullshit.
Fuck.
And then his friends were like, well, hey, Bobby, Sir Bobby, if you're so tough, well, then how about you go spend a night at 50 Berkeley Square? In fact, well, not only do you have to stay at 50 Berkeley Square, you got to stay in the most haunted room.
Yeah.
He's like, sure, whatever. I'll do it.
And he just has to be like, fuck, my honor is on the line.
This is much...
I literally have to do this.
This is very much like a cold open before a horror movie begins.
Yes.
Like before the credits roll.
Mm-hmm. Like we'll see this person die and then...
It'll roll
and then
credits.
We'll be like, oh, fuck. Uh-oh. But now we gotta watch the protagonist not know about it.
Well, after a while, these young men, they part ways. And Sir Robert makes his way over to 50 Berkeley Square. He chats with the landlord about a stay for the night on the second floor. Apparently, the landlord himself was even very hesitant about letting this guy stay in this specific room. But the young man pushed, and finally the landlord relented. But under two conditions. One, he had a bell rigged up, like a pulley in that room. He could pull it, and a bell in the landlord's room on the first floor would ring.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So one, if something happens, ring that bell. Two, I'm going to request that you keep a pistol on you during the night.
That's intense.
Yeah.
But I guess at the time, that was just people were like, okay.
Well, Robert's sort of surprised by how seriously the landlord is taking this whole thing, but he just shrugs it off. Robert bid the landlord goodnight and assured him he would be just fine, and then both men retired to their rooms. Well, it was just after midnight, not even an hour after the men had gone to bed, when the landlord was awakened in his room by a single ring of that emergency bell. The landlord's room was on the first floor, and he laid there for a moment and listened. He wondered if he should go to Robert's room or not. He thought maybe the young guy had just gotten a little freaked out and rang it. Well, the landlord was just about to settle back into bed when the emergency bell started to ring furiously without stopping. It was like it was going to get torn off the wall.
Oh my God.
And that's when he heard a gunshot and the bell stopped ringing.
Oh my God.
Like a rocket, the landlord sprinted from his room on the first floor up to Sir Robert's room. He knocked, called out for him, but got no response. So he pushed the door open. He looks around the room, and actually the room was relatively untouched. I mean, probably because Sir Robert hadn't gone to his room. It was less than an hour ago, so he hadn't really had time to make a mess or anything.
Right.
He's looking around because it's dark in there, and suddenly the landlord jumps back in horror. Slumped in the corner of the room was the corpse of Sir Robert. Still in his hand, gripped tightly, was the pistol he had just fired. His eyes were bulging wide, and his face contorted in a look of terror. It was like something had literally scared this guy to death.
Oh my God, so this is for real.
For real. Across the room from the body was a bullet hole in the wall. But of course, he didn't know what he was shooting at. It was just a hole in the wall. But whatever it was,
God.
and they looked, obviously later would examine the body, no sign of violence. It was clearly this man had died in fear.
Wow.
And he's a 20-year-old man. It's not like he's an old man with a busted heart or something.
Oh my God. Wow, that is
Horrifying.
What the f***? So it's like whatever he saw scared him to death, literally, or did this thing kill him somehow in a way that there's no injury, that we see. It's like maybe this entity killed doing some shit. I don't know.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Well, now that someone had officially died in the house, on record, the reputation of this place began to grow.
That dude's friends must have felt so fucking bad.
Oh, I'm sure his friends felt... can you imagine that? Daring your friend, and then they end up dead? I mean, at the same time, it's not like you dared him to, jump his motorcycle over a rip. I kind of can't blame them, because you don't fucking expect that to happen.
No, it's definitely not their fault.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not like they should feel guilty.
Right.
It's just, I'm sure they did feel guilty.
Right.
That's just such a crazy thing to happen.
Right. So, in 1859 was actually when it was leased by a man named Thomas Myers. Now, Myers was recently engaged to be married, and he leased this place for him and his wife-to-be. And he was making it a home. He was so excited to start a new life with his new bride. He apparently had the place nicely decorated and furnished with elegant things. Well, I couldn't find any specifics, but I guess Myers had his heart broken when his wife decided not to marry him. It didn't go into specifics if it was an affair, or if she ran off, or if she just said, hey, no, or I don't know.
That's a bummer.
But regardless, Myers' heart was broken. He apparently locked himself away in his room, only opening the bedroom door occasionally to get food from his servant. He refused to see any guests and became a total recluse. He slept during the day and at night would roam about the house. He'd walk from room to room by candlelight. And it was said that people on the street could watch the candlelight passing from room to room, and it was reported that there were strange noises, almost like Myers was rambling or shouting loudly, sounds of him working away on something.
Oh, God.
And so because of this real person and stuff, this began to really bolster the idea that this 50 Berkeley Square was a haunted place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this man, I understand that this man is clearly going through it, but it looks scary. It's like you're only doing anything at night and you just have this candle. You're roaming around your house. That's very scary.
Makes me think of that Tom Waits song, What's He Building in There?
Yes, it is like that.
So his mental state just keeps getting worse and worse until eventually he just went mad. In 1873, the local council actually sued him because he hadn't been paying his rent.
Oh, no.
He even failed to appear in court. But wildly enough, the magistrate apparently dismissed the charges against him because it was a well-known fact he was living in a haunted house.
Oh, wow.
That's what the sources say, but part of me wonders if they realized he clearly wasn't mentally fit. Mm-hmm. If maybe that had something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But either way, they backed off. And that following year, November of 1874, Thomas Myers passed away at the age of 76. Now, what we do know is that during this time Myers was living there, it really took on the look of a haunted house because Myers neglected to do any upkeep.
Right.
And the house falling into disrepair almost kind of mirrored his deteriorating mental state.
Yes, very poetic.
And then after he died, the house would go through long stretches without an owner, despite it being an incredible part of town.
Right.
And the state Myers left the place in, of course, only bolstered its reputation. In 1870, a writer named W.E. Howlett gave a description of 50 Berkeley Square and the tales surrounding it. And this excerpt really sums up what the public during that time thought of this place. The mysteries of Berkeley Square still remain a mystery. The story of the haunted house in Mayfair can be recapitulated in a few words. The house contains at least one room of which the atmosphere is supernaturally fatal to body and mind. A girl saw, heard, and felt such horror in it that she went mad and never recovered sanity enough to tell how or why. A gentleman, a disbeliever in ghosts, dared to sleep in number 50 and was found a corpse in the middle of the floor after frantically ringing for help in vain. Rumor suggests other cases of the same kind, all ending in death, madness, or both as a result of sleeping or trying to sleep in that room. The very party walls of the house, when touched, are found saturated with electric horror. It is uninhabited save by an elderly man and his wife who acts as caretakers. But even these have no access to the room. This is kept locked. The key being in the hands of a mysterious and seemingly nameless person who comes to the house once every 6 months, locks up the elderly couple in the basement, and then unlocks the room and occupies himself in it for hours. So interesting.
Whoa, what? What is going on?
And well, here's the other thing. Some things we know happened in this house, and then there's a lot of stuff that's kind of different, just legends that may or may not have actually happened. So it sounds like obviously he mentions the young man, Robert Warboys, who died.
Yes.
The woman, I'm not sure. I hadn't heard of the woman. So who knows? Some of this might be real that I just didn't find in sources, or it's just hearsay that got folded into the real legend. Either way, someone fucking died in that room and was scared to death.
Yes. So the idea of someone coming every 6 months to check in on the room.
Yeah.
Was that something that
was Myers doing? Did he leave and come?
Right. Is that like a fact, or is that one of these things where it's like it may be true?
That I don't know, because also I didn't also these sources, the dates vary a lot.
Right.
So if anything doesn't add up, if you've heard the story and it doesn't add up with what you've heard, it's not that you're wrong. I'm just trying to whittle this together best I can.
Totally. Yeah.
So there's some instances here where I'm not sure if that was lore that had gotten baked in or what was it. Obviously, like we said, Warboys happened, all that stuff. But interesting stuff. And we'll, at the end of the show, we're going to piece together a lot of things because I have theories as well.
Okay, yes. I would love to hear that. This is just so weird. Like, it's not just, you can tell that something else is going on. It's not just like a regular haunted house.
Right.
And a regular haunted house is dope as hell. I love a regular haunted house.
Right.
So when you add a little extra stank on it, you know I'm fucking there, my dude.
Well, sometime during the 1870s, legend has it that a local aristocrat and politician named George Littleton agreed to a bet to stay the night in 50 Berkeley Square. He was aware of the legends and I think took it more seriously because he took a shotgun with him.
Jesus.
Sometime during the night, he encountered an apparition. He didn't get a good look at it because it was dark, but he swears he saw tentacles. He fired his shotgun at it, hitting whatever he saw. But when he searched, he could only find the empty shotgun cartridge, nothing. Couldn't find what he thought he had hit. So after this story came out, because he lived to tell the tale.
Oh, God.
That's when suddenly the whole concept of a thing began to be associated. It went beyond just a haunting to a thing also lurks in Berkeley Square.
Because he saw something that looked like tentacles. Oh, that's so bizarre.
So this was interesting, though. Obviously, Lord Littleton survived this encounter. But a few years later, because I think they said it was around 1872, they think, when he did this, but sometime during the 1870s. In 1876, Littleton took his own life at the age of 59 by throwing himself down the stairs of his London home. I couldn't find any reason why or whatnot, but it is interesting that a few years later, he ended up killing himself. It could be completely unrelated to this. I don't want to say it's associated, who knows, but it is interesting.
It's worth noting for sure.
And the way he did it, he threw himself down the stairs.
Oh, wow. That is bleak.
If I threw myself down the stairs, I'd expect to get hurt. I wouldn't know how to, do it the right way.
Right.
It seems like out of your hands. You'd think you'd want to you know what I mean?
I know, yeah. It's very, I don't even know. Yeah, that's a lot.
So after Littleton's experience there, the reputation just keeps building.
Yeah, for real. I mean, good Lord.
Like I said, this place would go unoccupied for long stretches at a time, but strangely enough, residents who lived on either side of the building would report hearing strange sounds coming from 50 Berkeley Square, even when it was vacant.
Oh, fuck.
Well, this next story, probably if you've heard of Berkeley Square, the haunting, this might be the story you've heard most. This is truly horrifying.
Okay, here we go. We get into the meat of it.
So it was 1887. And there in London one evening docked a ship called the Penelope. 2 sailors from the ship, a Robert Martin and an Edward Blunden, were out on leave that evening, and they spent the night in the pubs of London, just having a good time. And so now it's nighttime, and they found themselves walking around the streets of London, and they'd kind of blown all their money at the bar. And they were without cash to get a room for the night. So they're just kind of walking around aimlessly, and they happened to be in Mayfair and Berkeley Square. And wouldn't you know it, because it was always vacant, on the outside of this property called 50 Berkeley Square was a for sale sign. They hadn't heard the legends of this place. All they know is, hey, there's a for sale sign, so they got a bright idea. Look, we can sneak in, have a roof for the night, and we'll be out in the morning before anyone even knows. But little did they know, they were already being watched. Now, the sources here vary just a bit. Some say they settled in on the top floor where Thomas Myers, his personal quarters were, and some say they settled in that room on the second floor where Sir Robert Warboys died. Either way, the men settled in for the night in this haunted place. So, now as the men were getting their things sorted, they began to hear weird things in the house. Like the sound of doors being slammed somewhere in the house, and they held their breath a moment because they were fearful that someone may be in the house and would catch them. Because they listened for a while, and the noises stopped. It sounded like whoever was there left, so whew.
Oh my gosh, that's so nerve-wracking.
I know.
That's so scary.
And keep in mind, this is before election, so if any light, they have candlelight,
Oh yeah, so it's so dark
So
in
dark
there.
in there.
Oh, that's I keep forgetting that. It's a whole other different kind of dark than I think I could even really wrap my head around,
Right. So they held their breath a moment until it sounded like whoever it was had left, and they settled in and eventually fell asleep. Well, it was just after midnight when Edward Blunden was awakened by a strange noise, this time by the sound of footsteps. But footsteps don't really properly describe what they were hearing, because these were not like any footsteps they had ever heard. It almost sounded like these footsteps were slithering up the stairs towards their room.
Oh my God.
Imagine that, like footsteps, but that almost have like a slither to them.
Yes. Oh, that is so chilling. You hear the impact of the foot
Yeah.
or whatever, but then
There's this
moves
added-
like a snake or
Yeah.
something.
Well,
It's probably like wet too.
Edward listened, holding his breath, as this lumbering, slithering sound reached the top of the stairs and finally stopped right in front of their door. Then it was silent. Robert Martin was still asleep, and Edward didn't want to wake him up because he didn't want whatever was out there to hear him.
Right.
So he just lays there in silence, and he watches in horror as the knob of the door begins to turn and the door opens. Something entered the room, but it was so dark Edward couldn't get a look at it. What he heard was a sort of wet sound, slithering over the wooden floorboards, making them creak. He looked around the room and he found on the floor a sort of viscous, slimy substance. But then he heard something right behind him. And as Edward turned around, what he saw was something that defied all description.
Oh God, my stomach hurts so bad.
One source simply described it as, quote, something shapeless and horrible. Another source described it as an amorphous, pulsating mass of gray. Edward screamed, which of course woke up Robert. And the newly awakened Robert watched as this creature leapt upon Edward and tentacles wrapped around his throat, tackling him to the ground. Almost like it makes me think of the face huggers from Alien.
Oh my God, this is so gross.
Robert stands there in shock, this indescribable nightmare creature literally wrapping itself around Edward's neck. Robert panics and he flees from the room, abandoning Edward to whatever this thing was.
Oh, that fucking sucks.
Without stopping, Robert runs out of 50 Berkeley Square and doesn't stop running until he finds a policeman out on patrol. He was pretty much incoherent, trying to describe to the policeman what the hell it was he saw. But either way, both men came running back to 50 Berkeley Square. As they arrived in front of the townhouse, both men stopped in their tracks in utter horror. There, impaled on the spiked metal railing that wrapped around the building's front, was the body of Edward Blunden. On his face was a look of indescribable terror, and upon close examination, they saw that Edward's neck had been broken. It was as if whatever the creature was, it broke Edward's neck and then literally threw him out the window like trash, and he just ended up getting impaled on the railing below.
Oh my God. That is so fucking crazy. So being impaled on the fence did not kill him. He was already dead.
See, right. It like broke it, and then it was just like it chucked his body, defenestrated his ass out the window.
Yes, very good word. And you'd have to think, too, would have to push his body out of the window with a good amount of force for it to get to like the outside. I mean, I'm sure the building didn't have like a huge yard, but still, like, I'm sure you'd have to really push that body out and like, oh God.
Now, in some sources, it says that Robert and the policeman went into the house looking for Edward and that they found his body in the basement, having been ripped apart.
Oh, fuck.
The most common one I've seen is that he was outside. So either way, though, didn't end well for Edward.
Either way, that really sucks.
Horrible death.
And either way, you can't really say it was he killed himself.
Exactly.
You can't say like, oh, he just threw himself out the window. It's like, no, his neck was already broken.
Right.
And then also it's like, you can't really just like rip yourself up.
Exactly.
Oh my God, that's so fucking scary.
Right.
What the fuck? You guys, I can't with the sea creatures or whatever they are. I can't.
And I think even one source I saw had a more mild description. I think their description was Edward's body was out front, not impaled. It was in the front yard, and it was as if he had thrown himself, basically killed himself to avoid whatever. So either way, one of those three.
That's
either
fucking
way,
scary too.
When you're willing to do it yourself to avoid whatever's coming at you, that's also not pretty.
That's also very scary, especially when he had no reason to do that. He was out hanging with his fucking mate, just drinking.
Absolutely.
And enjoying the sights. This is not, why would he do that? Oh my God, this is so scary.
Well, ever since that incident, of course, stories about the place multiplied. Like I said, some real, some who knows.
Right.
This episode obviously is going to focus more on this creature and the stories that surround it. But there's plenty of other ghost stories about Berkeley Square, by the way.
Oh God.
Maybe that's something we'll do for our Patreon bonus.
Yes, we will definitely do that for a little bonus content.
In the 1930s, the place was bought by a businessman named Ed Maggs, who transformed the first floor into a bookstore and antique shop called Maggs Brothers.
Ooh.
The store remained there from the 30s until 2015.
Wow.
And during that long stretch, at no time, no real incidents of note ever occurred.
Huh.
But apparently when Ed Maggs moved in there was a specific room on the second floor that was locked up and off limits. Some people reported, like when they were in the bookstore on the first floor, hearing noises coming from the second floor where that room would be. But like I said, nothing really of note. Obviously nothing tragic or fatal like...
Right. So maybe it can be confined.
Absolutely. And even though it seems the worst has passed, 50 Berkeley Square obviously has maintained its reputation as a haunted place. And it's still called most haunted house in London.
Okay. Because we got most haunted house in England is Borley Rectory, right?
That's right. But haunted house.
So this is most haunted house in London.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, there's some interesting theories as to what might have been going on at 50 Berkeley Square. Now, while the stories we focused on, like I said, was on this tentacle thing, apparitions of all kinds have been spotted in this house. Some reported seeing straight up ghosts as you would traditionally think of them. For others, it's sort of an amorphous mist. And some have even described clusters of shadow and shadow people. And for some, of course, there was this physical creature with claws and tentacles and whatnot. Well, one theory is that there's some sort of a doorway within this house, a rift that allows for all sorts of creatures to come and go.
Yeah, a little bit of a flap there,
Maybe
like a mini flap. Yeah.
Sometimes it's ghosts, sometimes it's demons, monsters, etc. And there's also a theory that this thing is an actual cryptid, something that perhaps made its way up through the Thames, through the sewer system, and eventually into the house.
Oh.
I have a theory, though.
Okay, pop off.
It's kind of like that doorway theory, but not really.
Okay.
My theory is, what if everyone's collective belief that there was something weird about 50 Berkeley Square, in effect, made it weird? And I don't mean that collective belief made it haunted, but what if the house itself was essentially manifesting the worst fears of its occupants? Think about it. In the first story, we don't know what Sir Robert Warboy saw, only that it scared him to death. Now, think about the weird creature the two sailors saw. It wouldn't be crazy to think that for sailors who spend months at sea at times, they would have fears of being killed by some sea-like creature.
Wow, that's so interesting. Weird.
And whatever they saw had tentacles. Now, we know Sir George Littleton obviously saw something with tentacles, but he lived to tell the tale. But then, of course, like I said, later he took his own life. And think about Thomas Myers. He lived in 50 Berkeley Square from 1859 to 1874. Why didn't whatever was in the house kill him? Well, what if what happened to Myers was his worst nightmare? He lived and died alone, a raving madman.
Oh my God.
Maybe whatever's in this house decided just to snack on Myers little by little rather than just gobbling him up. I'd be interested to learn what happened to that sailor who lived.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Dylan, you are blowing my dang mind right now.
And obviously that's just a theory. There's nothing to prove
so
it. But
cool,
what if the
though.
house itself manifests whatever you are afraid of?
Yes, it's kind of like a Bogart for Harry Potter fans.
Right.
Or that's basically exactly what this sounds like. It's this like entity that can sense or just can know what you're afraid of, and then it presents itself as that.
Right.
Like it isn't actually like, a shark or whatever.
Exactly.
It's, but it seems to you like a shark. It's also kind of reminds me of like a little bit of a tulpa kind of. Like, so even though it's different for each person, but it's like so much scary energy or fear has been like put onto this location for so long. And maybe there was something there anyway. Like there were those tragic deaths there. And then maybe there, like all of the UK is like so much paranormal activity there going on. Like fairy circles or mounds everywhere and ruins, Stonehenge, like all that. It's like maybe the land itself is rich with that kind of thing. Right. And it's kind of like a perfect storm where it was like the land was open to it, and then these things happened, and then everyone in London at the time was like into all of this stuff, and it just like the energy just blew up.
Well, interestingly enough, apparitions with tentacles are actually a thing. My source refers to them as octopoid entities.
Oh my God.
And they seem to move about interdimensionally. One witness to these strange apparitions told her story on a website called Psychic Experiences. She explained that growing up, she was constantly plagued by shadow people and could see spirits. She was really, attuned to that sort of thing. But recently, she'd had an encounter with an entity she was not familiar with, and here is how she described it.
A week ago, I encountered an entity that looked so ridiculous that I brushed it off as my own imagination. It had a structure of a human, head, torso, 2 legs, but the remarkable difference was it had 8 octopus-like tentacles for arms. I couldn't remember how its face looked like because at that time it seemed so ridiculous to me that I didn't take any time to study it.
That's so
weird, right?
Gross and weird. It reminds me of Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2.
Oh yeah, good point. I think even like in some instances of Slender Man stories, he has like these tentacles.
I mean, he's also serving us, like real firm and true Ursula vibes.
You're right.
It's weird, but also it's like octopi are supposed to be
real smart,
so
right?
intelligent, like
freaky smart.
Basically like the humans of the sea, essentially.
Exactly.
So it makes sense that maybe this like other being or entity would be somewhat of a whatever octopi are called, cephalopods or whatever. It's like maybe it makes sense that it would be like the top of the food chain in that realm or something.
Exactly.
It's like it kind of lines up a little, I guess.
Right. Well, it's about to get even creepier.
Oh, come on.
On an episode of the program Darkness Radio, which is actually hosted by Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis. Dave Schrader, I think he hosts that show Holzer Files. That's on Discovery Plus and stuff. It's like a paranormal show. I've seen him in like those shows.
Oh, okay.
But I guess this is their like radio program. It's sort of like a talk radio for paranormal. The show had a caller call in by the name of Ken, told them about a frightening experience. It happened to him in the town of Rosemead, California, and there Ken lived in a small house, he also ran a tattoo parlor out of, and almost immediately, Ken began to notice strange things happening. He could hear the sound of something moving around in the dark, in the kitchen, in the living room. He even claimed to see a sort of misty shadow moving about the house, but none of that compared to an encounter he had one night, and this is how he describes it.
One night I woke up in a very calm and relaxed state, but I found myself floating above the bed with my feet barely hovering off the mattress. I knew I wasn't dreaming because I was aware of all the items in my room and my eyes were scanning around. I found my body floating gently back down onto the bed, but was suddenly slammed down onto the mattress violently, as if someone put his hand across my face and pulled me down. Felt as if I was in that state of sleep paralysis. To my horror, as I looked to my side, I couldn't move my face or body, but with my eyes, I could clearly see the silhouette of a shadow figure or of this creature. I saw the clear, defined, sharp-pointed nose, and as crazy as it sounds, the silhouette of this had tentacles for arms, with all these suction cuffs clearly defined. Its other arm held my head down to the bed and pulled it, as if it was trying to make me look back at the ceiling, and in shock, every inch of my black ceiling was covered with this bizarre-looking hieroglyphic, as if it were painted in wet substance. In my head, it was the color of blood, as it was hard to make out the moonlight shining through my window. I felt as if the entity was trying to tell me something. With all my energy, I willed myself out of this paralyzed state, and once I blinked my eyes, it was over. No writings on my ceiling, no creature. Everything was gone. A few other weird things happened after this incident, especially at night and sometimes even during the day, but nothing that tops that crazy night I told you about. I'm not sure if there's a dark history in this residence or if I'm just haunted myself, because I've seen things in every place I've lived. Friends don't believe me, thinking I was under the influence of something, but I wasn't. I was completely sober. I know what I witnessed.
Wow.
That is so fucking weird. This thing on the ceiling, like
hieroglyphics.
Weird. And also just like very gross about like this like wet substance.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a no for me.
Absolutely.
But cool though. It sounds like an episode of Smallville, to be totally honest with you.
It kind of does, doesn't it?
Yes, it really, really does.
Well, I got another one.
Okay.
There's a website called yourghoststories.com, and as the name implies, it's where people post their personal paranormal experiences.
Yes, I love that.
Well, a man wrote in with a story about an experience he had shortly after moving into an apartment in Illinois with his wife and their 2-year-old son.
Oh, well, that's the state we're in.
Well, after moving in, he would out of the blue just have these sudden painful headaches, which he had never experienced before until he had moved into this place. And even though this was new for him, he kind of shrugged it off, assuming that it was just the stress of, moving and their young parents and whatnot. Their child was 2, and I'm sure a handful.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he brushed it off, believing that once the family had settled into their new home, these things would subside. Well, that's not what happened. One night, he was awakened by a terrible encounter, and this is how he describes what happened.
It was one Sunday when my son was playing in my bed, and all of a sudden he started screaming, holding his head. When I asked, he showed me the exact spot, same place where I get my pain in my head, and he said it hurt. I was a little concerned, but I decided to ignore it. The interesting thing here is that I was no longer feeling this pain anymore, but my son started getting this pain, and often. We took him in for a medical checkup, and they couldn't find anything wrong. Finally, after 3 doctor's visits, I decided to consult a supernatural medium to protect us, and it worked. The face-to-face encounter, though, happened one night. We were in a deep sleep, and I was suddenly awakened, and I noticed a pink ball with tentacles floating above my son's body. We tried to catch it, and it just moved away and disappeared, and I guess I fell asleep. The very next night, we were all sleeping, and I was awake at 12:05 in the morning, and I saw the wall above my head, and the ceiling was full black. I turned around and stared at the wall just 2 feet away, and I saw a totally black object with huge tentacles floating. After this incident, it finally confirmed that there was some sort of demonic presence in the apartment, and I secured us a new house until we could be fully vacated.
Wow.
What the fuck? That pink ball with tentacles?
Pink ball. Yeah, with tentacles. Weird.
That's so gross.
Notice, though, it happened just after midnight, like a lot of the stories that happened in Berkeley Square.
I wonder what that's about. That's so weird. And, I mean, it's got to drive you crazy and make you furious when it starts happening to your son or to your child.
Of
it's
course.
like, how dare you do that to
Absolutely.
a child? And it makes you wonder, it's like, is it doing that?
Right.
Or it's like a side effect of this thing
Right.
just being around.
Exactly.
I wonder what that's about, but oh, that's creepy. Wow. So it's like, so these other stories that we talked about today, it's like, do you think that maybe those could be the same thing that's happening in Berkeley Square? Or are they different? Or like, what do you think is going on?
Tentacles is so weird. Like, it's just such a weird thing to like I said, it's very Lovecraftian.
Right. And it's just like so unknown to us. You know,
Right.
it's like so foreign and alien, really.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, you know, we don't really know anything, even though I know these things like aren't necessarily from the ocean.
Right.
But just like those kind of beings, those kind of animals
Right.
are just so different from us.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing with Grinning Man, where it like kind of shakes your perception of reality. It's like, so what is real? Because something clearly is going on there.
Absolutely.
Oh God, that's so scary.
All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for the Shapeless Terror of Berkeley Square.
Oh my goodness gracious, Dylan. Thank you so much for doing that fantastic research.
It's my pleasure.
And taking us on that weird journey.
It's a weird journey.
To London town.
Why don't we cleanse the palate with my favorite part?
Yes, please, please, please. This will give you joy and strength and stamina for sex.
That's right. Of course. Ladies and gentlemen, our top-tier Patreon subscribers, of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish face Via Alungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the vivacious Vicky McHugh, the tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British bone-breaker Bex Martin, the notorious Nicholas Barker, the terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the loathsome Johnny Love, and the carnivorous Kevin Bogey.
Wow. Once again, thank you to our top tier Patreon donors. We love all of our Patreon donors, not just our top tier.
Of course, we love all our listeners. Doesn't matter.
Oh my gosh. Of course, we love you all. But if you are interested and you would like to check out some of our bonus content and you'd like to support the show, we invite you to check out patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. And also please like, rate, subscribe, share, all the above.
It really helps us out when you do.
It does. And thank you for joining us. We are so happy to have you with us.
Absolutely. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Bye now.